The frequency of serial killer conspiracies from Wikipedia data. William Bonin, shown here, is the poster child for serial killer conspiracies. Although he's often described as a serial killer, and even suggested to have acted alone in some accounts, in fact, he had at least 4 known accomplices: Gregory Miley, William Pugh, Vernon Butts, who participated in many of the murders, and James Monroe. He was one of 3 supposed freeway killers in Southern California in the 1970s, early 80s, who are often thought to be the same killer at one point. He's one of the most notorious serial killers for killing a very large number of people, yet about 56 of the 553 serial killers active in the United States from 1950 to 2020 had accomplices. They did not act alone. They were part of a conspiracy. That's about 10%. What does this tell us? We often hear the term conspiracy theory, and it's sometimes expanded to include things like conspiracy theorist, even just the use of the term conspiracy as a pejorative term. It's a common belief among intellectuals that conspiracy theories are inherently irrational, or so unlikely as to be essentially inherently irrational. It's often used to simply dismiss all sorts of things. So the dictionary definition of a conspiracy theory is just a theory that a conspiracy was involved in some illegal or harmful event. More than one person working together did something bad. When surviving family, friends, neighbors, police investigators, news reporters, or others suspect something like that, they must consider a conspiracy theory. But in our popular discourse, it means something completely different. Something insane, something crazy, as if, in fact, suspecting a conspiracy indicates that you're mentally ill, psychotic, crazy, loony. It's become a synonym for an irrational theory contradicted by evidence and reason, which is not what it means in ordinary English. It's somewhat like George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984, in which Newspeak kind of redefines the language so you can't even think, or at least express in words, all sorts of ideas, like that the government is wrong, for example, becomes essentially impossible. Is it irrational to suspect conspiracies? Are they extremely rare? We obviously have laws against them. We also obviously have more than a few cases of people being convicted of them. But how common are they? Well, the term conspiracy theory is frequently applied to events which are murders or mass murders. Things like the assassination of President Kennedy, his brother, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, or attempted murders like the attempted murder of Ronald Reagan in 1981, or mass slaughter events like 9/11, like the September 11 attacks. Or, in the context of the COVID events, the COVID pandemic, for example, the suggestion that it was a deliberately released, genetically engineered virus is, of course, what the conspiracy theories often refer to, as well as various suggestions that have been made that, for example, the use of intubation, a very dangerous procedure, was encouraged for sinister purposes in the case of COVID to boost the number of deaths, actual deaths, caused by the virus. It is these kind of situations where the consequences of the conspiracy are vast. The conspirators are presumably powerful people in the government, business, academia, the elite. Here we hear the term conspiracy theory. And generally people apply the term conspiracy theory to theories implicating people they identify with, that are members of their group, their political party, their faction. But there is a large bipartisan, spanning the supposed political spectrum, use of conspiracy theory. Very few organizations, regardless of their seeming politics, want to take on even the assassination of President Kennedy, despite widespread doubts throughout the U.S. population. Well, if we look at murder statistics from the FBI, here we have for 2019, we find that among murders, about 12.8% in 2018, that's almost 2,000 here, have multiple offenders, and these are a single victim with multiple offenders, and then at 1.9%, a couple hundred have multiple victims and multiple offenders. And that's normally what we mean by a conspiracy and a murder. There are multiple people committing the murder in some way. It's not that uncommon according to the FBI statistics. Now, official government statistics and FBI statistics have been known to be wrong, whether due to political pressure, bias, or error. In the early 1980s, a lot of questions were raised about the accuracy of the FBI's estimates of the number of serial killers and serial homicides. They were puffing up the numbers, or at least that's what it looks like. I wanted to do a check on where we actually know who the killers are, who the victims were. High-profile serial killer cases are an example of this. And in fact, the stereotype is these are lone nuts. This is just some crazy loner in his mom's basement or something like that. And that may well be true of a majority of serial killers. However, it turns out it's not true of all of them, nor is it exceptionally rare for serial killers to have accomplices, to be part of a conspiracy. I previously analyzed the frequency of conspiracies and high-profile serial killer cases listed in Jack Rosewood's big book of serial killers, which has about 150 cases from around the world, mostly the United States. This analysis indicated about 5 to 10% of cases were serial killer conspiracies. I subsequently came across Wikipedia's list of serial killers in the United States webpage, which has 553 serial killers reported active in the U.S. from 1950 to 2020. Now, actually, it has many more, like from the 1800s and earlier. I didn't want to deal with those because of issues about the quality of the statistics collected by different police agencies. So I wanted something relatively modern. On the other hand, I wanted to go far enough back to see the seeming serial killer wave during the 1970s and 80s in the larger context, hence from 1950 to 2020. Though this is a larger data sample and seems more comprehensive and is specific to the United States alone. So it's possible to extract the data here from this table. It's this huge table of identified serial killers, people who are actually convicted or confessed. We take that, we do an analysis of it, and there's information in the notes section here about those who had accomplices or worked with somebody else. So it's not a perfect mechanism. It's probable that there are some at least small errors in counting from this data, and although it appears fairly accurate, nonetheless, it's a huge table, huge amount of work here, so there's probably some errors at a small level. When I'm talking about accomplices here, I'm referring to people convicted in a court of law. We're not including unsubstantiated claims by the serial killer, a number of whom have claimed to be involved in various conspiracies. Suspects never convicted, including named or unnamed suspects suggested in books like Maury Terry's The Ultimate Evil or Dave McGowan, It's Not a Relation of Mine, Programmed to Kill. So we're really focusing on cases where there's solid, convictions, forensic evidence that there were other people involved. We find that there are 56 named serial killers out of the 553 who had accomplices. Some of those are other named serial killers, and many of the accomplices actually are not listed as serial killers. So that's about 10% of the names in the table. A 95% confidence interval would say around 8 to 13% of serial killer cases are, in fact, conspiracies to have accomplices. It's more than one person. That's fairly significant. It's not 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 1,000,000 or something like that. It's more like 1 in 10 cases. Well, let's just show the plot that I did here, showing some of the cases over the period from 1950 all the way up to 2020. Again, you can see the serial killer wave here. A lot more cases and a lot more people killed in the 70s and 80s, dropping off in the 90s. In fact, if you look at all statistics, you can see it peters out. There don't seem to be as many serial killer cases the last 10 or 20 years as anywhere near what seemed to be going on in the late 70s, early 80s. It's hard to be absolutely sure about these numbers. There's less attention to these cases. We seem to have a lot of mass shootings replacing the serial killers in the last decade or so. Now, some of the worst cases of the conspiracies are Dean Corll here. And Dean Corll had at least 2 accomplices, Elmer Wayne Henley is also listed down here, and David Owen Brooks. These were both teenagers who worked for him and killed several people, or helped him kill several people. They both confessed. They're both life in prison. He was murdered, well, not murdered, I think killed in self-defense by Elmer Wayne Henley. And there's evidence, in fact, in the Dean Corll case of other people being involved to some degree in what was going on. They were never charged. There's a lot of evidence of police maybe looking the other way for some reason. William Bonin kind of puts him, our poster child before, is also one of the worst cases. With, I think here it's saying over 20 people killed by William Bonin and his accomplices, 4 accomplices that I mentioned before. And there's a lot of odd things about this particular case, perhaps similar in some ways to Dean Corll. So there are conspiracies, and I don't go in here to suggestions of larger conspiracies, unindicted people, or people who are never charged. As I said in the Dean Corll case and William Bonin case and a few other cases, there's indications maybe more people were involved, something more was going on. These could be prostitution rackets, pornography rackets, strange cults, various kinds of things like that. So in conclusion, conspiracies are not that rare in murder cases. They do occur, and apparently at around maybe a 10 to 15% level. Now, serial killer cases are thought to generally be a rather solitary activity. When you're talking about high-profile murders of people like President Kennedy or various other events, there are presumed to be very strong motivations for groups of people in those cases to commit them and work together. So there's money, political power, etc. It's simply not irrational to consider the possibility of conspiracies in murder cases in particular, and undoubtedly many other kinds of activities. Again, murder cases and attempted murder cases are an awfully large fraction of these events which are labeled, or interpretations where the term conspiracy theory comes up to ridicule the suspicions of people. So there are lots of serial killer conspiracy cases, well documented in a court of law.
This concludes this video presentation. If you like this video, please click like. Please click subscribe and the notification bell if you would like to receive more content from us. You can avoid internet censorship by subscribing directly to our RSS news feed. Please consider sharing the link by email and on your website or blog, in addition to liking, upvoting, or sharing on increasingly censored, advertising beholden, big company social media. We have encountered such censorship. Mathematical software is developing algorithms and software to automate data analysis, reducing the risks of costly errors and increasing the predictive power of the results. You can support our work financially by subscribing on our Patreon page, https://www.patreon.com/mathsoft, or scanning the QR code in the lower right corner.